So last time we looked at how the price elasticity of demand would impact the effect of a change in a determinant. Now what I'd like to do is really think about how can we change the elasticity of demand itself. Right? So if the price elasticity of demand is really influencing the impact of these market changes, then another big question should be, well, can we change that price elasticity of demand? Can we change the cross elasticity? Right? What is it that we can do to think about how the elasticity itself changes? And we could talk about these in a very similar way as we did before as a determinant of something. And so the determinant of the price elasticity of demand would be something that changes that elasticity. That's not really price itself, right, but will impact kind of the effect of that quantity. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Remember, we are really talking about then sort of a quantity and price. We're talking about a demand curve here. So what is it that's going to influence the demand curve? Is this relatively flat or relatively steep? Well, we can go back and think about where did this demand curve really come from? Remember, we had a few big pieces sort of this, right? There was the income effect. There was the substitution effect. There was diminishing marginal utility. And all of those things really impacted this downward sloping demand, this negative relationship between price and quantity. Well, that should give us some insight then into what's going to impact that elasticity. Imagine we, say, looked at something like the substitution effect. Remember, what was that? That substitution effect was really saying as the price falls, some people are going to find this product more attractive. As the price rises, people are going to look for cheaper ways to satisfy their desires. So that substitution effect then is really something that's impacting the price elasticity of demand. How good are those substitutes in the market? Right, so take something like cell phones, for example. Well, when we think about cell phones, we have a whole bunch of different brands that we could choose from. Within the brands, we have different models, right? And the question then for the price elasticity of demand is going to be, right, as the price changes, how big is that change in quantity? Well, in order for someone to substitute one product for another, right, they really need to think that that product is a good substitute, right? Whereas as the price difference gets bigger, right, so say a $200 or a $300 price difference from one phone to another, right, there may be some consumers who say, sure, that product isn't exactly like the other one, but that substitution effect is going to cause me to demand the cheaper product. Or maybe I really need those advanced features or those additional features, and so that big price difference isn't going to impact me very much. So the substitutability here is a big part of this price elasticity of demand. Right? If products are really good substitutes, what's going to happen? This thing's going to be more elastic. If the products instead are really bad substitutes, this thing's going to be more inelastic. Right? So this is where we have good substitutes. This is where we have not very good substitutes. And you could see then that price change from, say, a market price to a higher price, right, that the impact of that is going to have a significant difference depending upon how good those substitutes are. Well, we could also look at, say, something like, I don't know, a change in income. Remember, a change in income, this thing was a determinant, right? It changed how much consumers were willing and able to buy. But what if now instead we think about income, but now from the perspective of what's that percentage of your income? Right? So take something really small, like, say, a candy bar. Right? A candy bar at, say, a price of 75 cents. Right? That there would be some quantity demanded at that price. Well, what's going to happen if the price rises? So if we looked at, say, a 5% increase, so plus 5%, that's only about 4 cents. right? So that'd be 79 cents. I'd be willing to bet most of us won't even notice if we go to the store that the candy bar was 75 cents yesterday and it's 79 cents today. And in fact, I bet a lot of people probably look at that and say, don't even look at the price. And so that quantity change would be really small. Well, why is it really small? It's because that price change doesn't really represent a big part of the amount of money that consumers are spending on a daily basis. So this is what it would look like for a candy bar. Maybe this change is really small. But what if you looked at something that was a much larger impact for your average consumer, say something like a car? Now we're talking about this point on the demand curve that could very well be $30,000. That same 5% increase over here, right, is now $1,500. And we see that change is much bigger. And people will respond to that $1,500 difference differently than they will respond to that 4-cent difference up here. And again, think a little bit about why that is. Well, we have to come back to that idea of opportunity cost, which we've seen before, right? That the opportunity cost of 4 cents is very different than the opportunity cost of $1,500. Right? There's not very much you can do with an additional 4 cents. There's a lot you can do with an additional $1,500. And so the elasticity of demand is going to be different here. Right? We would expect up here where that price difference is really only 4 cents. Right? What's going to happen to the change in quantity? It's not going to change very much. This is going to be relatively inelastic. Well, what about down here? This is going to be more elastic. And again, it's important for us to consider that we're really talking about the comparison between these two. This thing's more inelastic, this is more elastic. We'd actually have to go through the calculation if we wanted to make an absolute statement about that. And we can see then that the price elasticity of demand is going to depend upon these pieces. Well, what else is going on here? You can imagine, what if we looked at, say, something that was a necessity, something like, say, diapers for a baby, compared to something that may be a little bit less of a necessity, something like toys. How would we expect that difference to impact the price elasticity of demand? It would be about the same way. A necessity, people need those. So the price change probably won't have a big impact on the quantity demanded. And then lastly, what if we thought about, say, the time frame over which a consumer is able to react to a price change? Take something that most of us use on a daily basis, gasoline in our cars. Right? If we looked at gasoline, then we have a quantity and a price. Right? That there's some demand for gasoline that depends upon sort of the price. So if you go to the gas pump and prices are higher, maybe you do something like you try to combine trips. You go to the grocery store and you go to the pharmacy, and you do that on one trip so you can save some gas at that higher price. But think about over, say, the course of the next week. How much can you do to impact the change in the quantity demanded? Not very much. You still have to go to the store. You still have to go to work. Maybe you have to drop the kids off at school. You have all of these tasks that you have to do, and there's really not much you can do. And so demand here would be what? It would be relatively inelastic. You're going to accomplish those goals, and there's not much you can do about it. But now, what if we thought about that time frame as being much longer? So think about how would your behavior change when you go from not thinking about the beginning of this week to the beginning of next week, but maybe now the beginning of this week to the beginning of next year. Now what we would expect to see is demand's going to be a little bit more elastic as a result of that. Well, why is that? Now we can do things that have a much longer lead time. We could say buy a more fuel-efficient car. We could find a way to carpool to work. And in fact, you could even say some people might even move closer to work. Or if you're in a city, maybe you can use public transportation as a result of that. So as the time frame over which we consider gets longer, we would expect demand to be a little bit more elastic. There's more ways that people can respond to those price changes. So a price change over here over a short time period, say gasoline prices rise by 50 cents, not very much you can do. Over here, gasoline prices rise by 50 cents, maybe you can actually do a lot more to impact your usage. So now what I'd like to do is think about the cross-elasticity. Right? These are all about the price elasticity of demand. So let's look at the cross-elasticity.